good afternoon to one and all, and welcome once again to another afternoon installment of Live at the Waterhole. My name is Liam Burrow. I am the wild earth naturalist that is going to be chatting you through a couple of these sunny waterside scenes as we hop between a couple of exciting live feeds across the continent of Africa. But anyway, before we get too caught up in the action, I'd love to remind you that once again, the whole idea behind these shows is to keep them as interactive as possible. So please keep your questions, comments, thoughts coming throughout the program. Myself and Director Tulu will be standing by waiting to hear from you. But kicking things off quite nicely here at Comfort's Dam, which is in the Kimberley area in South Africa, with our very special colony of greater and lesser flamingos, as well as a number of water birds. How cool is that? Now, these flamingos don't look too active. I think a lot of them are just resting and perhaps doing a bit of preening in the sunshine. And with a lifestyle spent in water, which is very, very sodic, high in things like salts and sulfur, they kind of have their work cut out for them in terms of keeping themselves and more specifically their feathers in good shape. So there's a big priority to preen multiple times per day. Quite interesting. There's a duck swimming past the back of those flamingos. He's got quite a pale face. That's actually a South African shell duck, a very, very special water bird that actually quite uniquely breeds underground, if you can believe it. So these shell ducks commandeer kind of old abandoned aardvark burrows, often in termite mounds quite close to the water, and that's where they lay their eggs and incubate them. Yeah, pretty fascinating. And if memory serves, James Henry, one of the other wild earth naturalists and our kind of head of naturalists, was reckoned to be one of the first people ever in the history of sort of wildlife content to actually film shell ducklings emerging from one of those holes. I believe that happened at Tswalu in the Kalahari during lockdown. Very, very interesting stuff. Hello, Catherine. Nice to be chatting to you all the way from very cold and snowy Germany. I hope this Live at the Waterhole show can bring a bit of warmth into your home today. And yeah, with some luck, hopefully spring will be breaking in Germany and the rest of the Northern Hemisphere sometime soon. Hello, Joan Mello. Hello, Casper. Nice to have all of you regulars coming back to us. Casper all the way from Milwaukee in the United States. Ah, fantastic. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what we're going to be getting up to, what we're going to be seeing around these waterholes today. It's looking like a slightly sunnier day across much of the southern hemisphere. So with rising temperatures, hopefully we get some thirsty drinkers coming down. Sugarbits has asked, how do we tell the difference between the greater and the lesser flamingo? And so I think, as far as the individuals we're looking at now, it's a bit tricky with their heads kind of tucked away, but I reckon these are the greater flamingos. So the greater flamingo has the pale pink bill, and the lesser, which is quite a bit smaller, has a much darker bill. And it's also pink, but the shade is dark and the tip is kind of black, or rather black. But unless we get the two of them together, or we get a bunch of them Yeah, there we go. A couple of raised heads there. These are the greater flamingos. Yeah, certainly very specialized birds in terms of what they need from the environment. They feed on some pretty unique things in the water, more specifically blue, green algae and diatoms, which occur in water with a very, very specific pH and some fairly specific temperature and mineral requirements. And this Comfort's Dam is actually an artificial wetland established a number of years ago by a very, very well-known South African ornithologist by the name of Mark Anderson and a local mining company. Now, flamingo living habitats and more specifically breeding habitats across Africa have historically been under an amount of pressure. So to have an area like this established and totally protected from kind of the activities of humans is a very special thing. I believe this wetland area and surrounding habitat, about 80 hectares, was only protected from about 2007. So it hasn't been going on for all that long, but with massive success. Very shortly after it was established, I think something like 7,000 chicks were hatched out in a single year, and the birds have returned time and again to raise little broods on a specially constructed island in the wetland. Casper says, being so far away yet feel like I'm there. Thank you, Wild Earth, and thanks, Casper. Again, always such a pleasure to be broadcasting live, unfiltered, unscripted wildlife content into people's homes and lives in all corners of the globe. Wildlife has always been an extremely important thing for me and in my life. It has been my life. It continues to be. But it's been quite humbling and quite staggering, and certainly through my sort of time here with Wild Earth and with Live at the Waterhole, to see just how many people around the world are equally gripped by it. It's powerful stuff, and with all of the other kind of nonsense going on in the world, all the politics, all the sad, depressing stuff, it's nice to look at some wildlife, some nature. Itzy says, good afternoon, Liam, ready for another great show. And good afternoon to you, Itzy. Yeah, let's see what's going to happen. Again, you just never really know. It's a bit of a roll of the dice, but I can't say I've ever really been disappointed. I think the key to it is a bit like the key to having a good safari, coming out with an open mindset and a bit of an interest in all of the small stuff as well. It's not always about the big, impressive animal species, though obviously we do value those sightings as well. Now, these wetlands are extremely important areas for the conservation of bird life and a number of other species, and they tend to be very fragile environments. They're excessively vulnerable to kind of the effects of the human world, to dumping of rubbish and chemical spills and that sort of thing. So keeping these areas pristine for the bird life that relies so largely on them is of critical importance. And also very important to keep people and our domestic animals out. You can imagine the havoc that would be created in a place like this with things like stray cats and stray dogs coming in to raid nests. So yeah, what a wonderful thing that this marshy wetland area at Comforts Dam has been established. And long may it live. It's obviously very, very popular with the local birds. We're kind of moving out of the summer season now, more into the dry season. So I doubt there is a large amount of bird breeding going on at the moment. But as conditions get quite tough out there and food and water is becoming harder and harder to find elsewhere, the birds do rely on these sort of permanent wetlands. And these flamingos are such peculiar birds with those almost flimsy looking legs, but they're pretty formidable. In certain parts of Africa, in some of the places they live and nest, they can be exposed to water temperatures that come close to boiling in some of the sodic lakes where they feed. And they're tolerant of water, which in some cases can be so acidic that it would quite literally blister and destroy the skin on the legs of other water birds that are not so well adapted to deal with it. Yeah, and perhaps quite shockingly, the closest relative of the flamingo in the bird community is the pigeon. Pigeons and doves. You would be forgiven for thinking it would be literally everything or anything else. And they certainly don't look or behave a lot like a pigeon. But apparently some distant connection there. And now these guys are filter feeders, so they've got an incredible system of filtration in their bill. They actually feed with their head upside down, so they feed with the upper surface of the bill pressed into the water. They kind of suck water into the opening of the bill, filter it through this almost fine mesh, almost like it's the baleen, it's called, in a whale's mouth. They spit out all of the salty and acidic water that they don't need and don't want, and take in all of those diatoms and blue-green algae. Now, the things that they feed on are full of something called carotenoids. Carotenoids are the colourful pigments that we find in things like carrots as the best, and things like tomatoes as well. And those carotenoids are what give the flamingos their vibrant pink coloration. The healthier, the more well-fed the flamingo, the more colourful. And flamingos living especially in captive conditions, where perhaps they're not getting enough of those carotenoids, almost get a bit washed out. They can look very pale, almost white. But these guys are clearly getting everything that they need. Alrighty, well, with our flamingos seeming to be remaining quite static and quite relaxed, I think we're going to head over now to Tembe to see what's happening on South Africa's east coast. So back over in Tembe National Park, or Tembe Elephant Park, in Maputaland, which is in the northernmost section of KwaZulu-Natal on South Africa's east coast, we are inundated once again with a big bachelor group of elephants by the looks of it. Also a number of impala feeding in those grassy areas in the back. Now, one thing is for sure, we can rely on this Tembe area to provide very regular sightings of some pretty magnificent ellies. And a couple of these bulls are becoming regulars. We're seeing them at the same time pretty much every day. It makes enough sense. Approaching 2 p.m., it's only a little after 1 at the moment. But at 2 p.m., the sun is radiating the maximum amount of heat that it will during the day. So things are hot. These ellies are thirsty and they want to cool down. A little bit of elephant body language there. As that bigger bull approached, the young guy happily yielded to him. The vast amount of elephant conflicts can be avoided simply through posturing. And the knowledge of a little bit of elephant behavior like that, and how reliant elephants are on one another's body language, can also be an extremely useful tool for us as naturalists, leading people out on safaris and especially on walking safaris. It is, after all, the knowledge of when to hold your ground, when to stand still, and when to back off that keeps us and our guests safe on those experiences. It can be tricky, and it's certainly always better to err on the side of caution. But in my humble 12-year career as a naturalist, dealing with ellies very regularly, day to day, I found them to be excellent communicators. And unwelcome conflicts are certainly very, very rare. If you kind of stick to the rules and make all of your decisions with respect for the animal as paramount. Some serious excavation going on there as this bull attempts to kind of stir up a bit of that chocolate-colored mud. And gradually these little depressions in this muddy soil will be kind of deepened and broadened on all sides. The mud in the bottom is also compacted by the weight of the elephant's feet. So now when we have torrential rainfall, and KwaZulu-Natal is known for that, and these depressions fill up and they can hold water into the dry season. And that is the formation of a natural pan, thanks to the elephants. So not always a destructive force. An absolute mammoth bull on the opposite side in the shade. He's a huge guy. Perhaps even rivaling the chap that we've just seen wallowing in terms of size. And Ray asks, where can you find the biggest ellies in Africa? Ray, it's probably pretty close. I would say somewhere between the Kruger National Park in South Africa's northeast and places like Amboseli in Kenya. Both home to some absolutely mammoth individuals, but there's potential that Amboselis are slightly bigger. Certainly East Africa is famed for elephants with larger tusks, though we do have a couple of small populations in some pretty secret spots in South Africa, where you can still see bulls with tusks that extend almost down to the ground when the elephant is stood upright. But those individuals are few and far between, unfortunately, these days. And that is thanks to hundreds and hundreds of years of persecution by various Europeans, my ancestors, unfortunately, who came into Africa and just shot ivory like it was an inextinguishable resource. It's reckoned that as early as 100 odd years ago, Africa was home to around 10 million elephants. And today that number sits somewhere around 250,000 to 350,000. Which, if you imagine them sort of all clustered together, is an enormous amount of elephants. But do the sums in terms of how quickly they've actually declined. Africa is a very different place today than it was 100 years ago. There are certainly millions and millions more people here. People obviously have needs, and we have to understand that human needs, basic human needs for survival, have to be met. People want to live in safety. Poverty-stricken people often want to grow crops to sustain themselves. And it is very difficult to coexist with something like an elephant that comes in and potentially can flatten your entire crop in a single evening. So we, I think, have to try and see the argument from both sides. Obviously, we empathize with the elephant, but I think it's important to feel the stresses imposed on those people as well. Thankfully, there are lots of solutions we can put into place to kind of mitigate that human-elephant conflict. And there are a few wonderful organizations doing just that. And certainly I think one of the biggest solutions to many of those problems are the encouragement of the development of sustainable ecotourism in Africa. Many of these very poor communities right on the fringes of our reserves need to be involved in the development of safari operations. If those people are given jobs and shown the importance and the value of elephants and all of the other species that call these wilderness areas home, those people are a lot less likely then to be trying to shoot and spear elephants that do come into their homelands to raid crops. And the safari tourism market is booming in Africa and set only to grow further and further in the next 10 years or so. So there's lots of hope. A local NGO, a local conservation setup called Elephants Alive has had enormous success establishing beehives around agricultural areas prone to kind of bouts of elephant raiding. Bees, after all, are an elephant's number one fear. So a couple of very little beehives serve a wonderful purpose, pollinating all the crops and successfully keeping the elephants out of the fields. And obviously those beehives produce honey as well, which can generate a little secondary income for some of those people. So it's a nice eco-friendly solution. Nothing has to suffer. The elephants are just encouraged to go elsewhere to the source of food. I, for one, cannot imagine an African landscape absent of elephants. They are one of those quintessentially African animals, and speaking personally, my absolute favorite. How cool is that? Hello, Bondia Bash. Thanks very much for the compliment. I'm very glad to hear that you're enjoying. Yeah, what a pleasure. Fuller says it's a throw mud on my back elephant day. Absolutely, Fuller. Yeah, these Ellies are jolly. They're having a great time. Sugar Bits asks, why is Tembe Elephant Park so beautiful? Sugar Bits, I'm not 100% sure why, but certainly these elephants are a big factor, I reckon. It's also just such a lush looking area. While much of the rest of southern Africa looks like it's in for a pretty difficult dry season, a very extra dry season. Tembe is like a little oasis. Certainly a very good thing if you're an elephant. They rely so heavily on quality vegetation to eat and the availability of good water in which to bathe and drink and do this wonderful mud splashing. Once again, this is a bachelor group, so exclusively males. There are no females as family members. The bulls gravitate towards one another from about puberty, which is the time at which they leave their natal groups, the groups they're born into. Not necessarily by choice. I think mostly that is from the pressure put on them by the adult females who don't really want them around anymore. As their testosterone comes in, they become quite boisterous and quite amorous with female family members, which from the perspective of inbreeding is obviously not really an ideal thing. So the girls push them out, and the boys kind of gravitate towards one another. They do a pretty good job of looking after each other. All of their social needs are met, and perhaps most importantly, they're given the guidance needed to become sort of fully formed, healthy adult male elephants. The reoccurring theme in elephant biology and elephant social structure is a shared system of knowledge, which I think is fairly spectacular. And it happens on both sides, in the families amongst the females and young, and then amongst these as well. There's a sense of community. And as older elephants pass away, they kind of pass their knowledge and their skills and their abilities in these environments to actually survive and eke out an existence down to the next generation, who in turn pass it down again. And that is a system and a story as basically as old as time. And just like that, the heaviest mammal to walk anywhere on land on planet Earth vanishes behind a couple of bushes. Elephantums, if you will. Gary asks, when do they start mock fighting? Gary, again, that'll probably start happening from the onset of puberty. As soon as that testosterone comes in, very similar to male humans, puberty hits somewhere between 10 and 15 years of age, and then they get very rowdy. And that's one of the big reasons as well that the cows don't really want them around. Elephant females are in an almost permanent state of pregnancy, and they've almost always got small calves around them. So boisterous young bulls pushing and shoving and all of that, bumping into one another, it's not really a pleasant or a safe thing around those very small and vulnerable youngsters. So it's a natural mechanism. It's time for them to go. Yeah, but if you put yourself into the mindset of that, whatever, 12 or 15-year-old elephant bull, he's essentially mentally and socially very much like a human teenager. So a very vulnerable time to just be sort of kicked out of the family. So those bachelor groups are a lifesaver. It keeps the bulls together, and certainly gives those youngsters the guidance they need, because they're not fully formed, fully developed social animals yet. That gives them everything they need to be a healthy, happy, well-rounded adult. Isn't that incredible? Alrighty, well, in the absence of our elephant bulls here at Tembe, let's cross the country once again, heading up now into the northwest to Tau in Madikwe. So over in Madikwe, nice, if not perhaps slightly drier scenes from Tau Lodge, where we've got a number of plain zebra hanging out in the open clearing around the waterhole. This waterhole at Tau is pretty significant. It's quite large. The water is also artificially pumped throughout the year through a borehole pump from a level well below the surface, many meters down. So this offers a permanent source of relief for the local wildlife throughout the year, through the good times and the upcoming drier times. Rainfall here this year has been a little bit disappointing, a little bit less than we were expecting. So as you can see, not much of a grass layer on the ground. So for a lot of our grazing herbivores, it is looking like it's going to be a challenging season. Still, we could be in for a bit more rain, but we are in April now, and that's quite late in the season. And this particular group of zebra, if we are looking at the same one, is quite a regular sight here around the waterhole at Tau. We've kind of been watching this little foal grow in recent episodes. He would have been born a number of weeks, just a few months ago. Yeah, a pretty vulnerable time, especially considering how favorable these zebra are for things like lions as a food source. All the more reason to hang out in the open, where it is so much more difficult for a predator to ambush them. Now, this little breeding herd of zebra will consist of a number of adult breeding mares who are responsible for delivering foals, and only a single stallion. Um, he's kind of in charge of the group. He's the dominant male. He does all the mating. But zebra society can be pretty tooth and claw, pretty brutal. There is constant fighting, and he will be regularly challenged for that sort of pole position as the dominant male. So that is another very large and ominous threat for this little foal. Should another group of zebra come in particular a group of bachelors, if one of those bachelors was successful in ousting the present dominant stallion here, first order of business would be to attack any foals under a certain age. Attack and potentially kill those foals. It might seem cruel, and it's certainly a pretty horrible thing to watch, but essentially that new stallion coming in wants to get rid of any of those foals that are still drinking milk, and make those mares available to mate as soon as possible. Essentially, he has no interest in becoming a stepdad and protecting somebody else's kids. His focus is on getting his genetic material into the population and producing some foals of his own as soon as possible. Ultimately, the number one goal of pretty much every living thing on the planet. Leaving behind a living legacy. Tracy asks, how long do zebras suckle for? I'm actually not 100% sure, Tracy, but it will be a number of months, maybe 5 or 6 months. Certainly exclusively milk drinking at the moment, but as that foal matures, it will start to supplement its diet with grass. The zebra are exclusive grazers. We only get 2 species of zebra in the country. We get these plains zebra, of which there are a couple of varieties in different localities in southern Africa. And then we get a Hartmann's mountain zebra as well. You see those in parts of the Kalahari into Namibia. Quite a bit more endangered. I think there's only something like 20-odd thousand of those Hartmanns left in the wild. But their habitat is very specialized. They live in sort of rocky, mountainous areas. There's a few places in the Cape where you can see them. These plain zebra that we're looking at here at Tau are much more common, more widespread. And then there is a third, distinctive species, the Grevy's zebra, which we find in some parts of East Africa. The largest of all the zebras, quite significantly larger. And it's characterized by these beautiful tight pinstripes, especially on their back. Yeah, it's one of the sort of beautiful things about visiting different safari locations as you travel between lodges in Africa. And while you may be looking at similar animals, often there are quite unique local variations to those. Even in terms of things like the giraffe, there's something like 5 or 6 very distinct giraffe varieties across Africa. I think it's one of the factors that brings so many people back year and again once that safari bug has bitten, and it bites hard. Now, there have been a number of theories as to why the zebra has evolved that coat of fairly striking stripes over the last couple of 100,000 years. Perhaps the most interesting of all of those theories came from Professor Caro. Now, Professor Tim Caro works at the Bristol University in the United Kingdom. And he is a zoologist who discovered that flies are put off by zebra stripes. Due to the way that ultraviolet light, which is a wavelength that flies can see but humans cannot, a depth perception error is created on the surface of the zebra's skin, preventing certain kinds of flies from landing. Isn't that just bizarre? Other theories, and these are perhaps lesser, but possibly also relevant theories, are that there are some sort of benefit when a pride of lions or some similar predator pursues a little zebra herd. The zebra instinctively all bunch together, and as they are sort of bolting away to try and escape that predator, the action of their bodies moving up and down very, very closely to one another creates quite a confusing, dazzling effect. The theory being that a predator will struggle to kind of focus all of its efforts on a single individual. And if a predator can't focus on one, it's much less likely to succeed. But truth be told, in the chaos of a kind of a lion hunt, very often one zebra will panic and run left when everybody else decides to run right. And it's that individual that goes the wrong way that will very often be taken. But yeah, I believe there's a company in Europe now that actually makes horse jackets that are covered in zebra stripes for that benefit against the flies. So if you do see a stripy horse in a field in Europe, it's not a zebra. It's interesting to think that there are so many natural solutions to natural problems out there. And I think when we are faced with such problems, we should be looking to the natural world. The answers are there. We've just got to be willing to spend the time, understand the processes, and we can often find a solution to our issues without chemicals or perhaps less effective human answers. Keeping an eye out for our resident crocodiles. That very large bird on the water's edge there, just to the left of the tree, is spur-winged goose, one of our biggest geese. No sign of our crocs, but I'm sure they're here somewhere. Spur-winged goose is just a huge bird, probably the size of a domestic turkey, 6 or 7 kilos, something like that. A Goliath. Yeah, as I say, no sign of those crocodiles yet. We may see a tail or a nose sticking out of the water somewhere. But ultimately, that is the reason why these crocodiles are so successful at being ambush predators. And when they are trying, they are awfully difficult to spot, even for you or I, humans with a fairly strong brain, with good vision, with an imagination. Yeah, almost cryptic in terms of their camouflage abilities. But anyway, nice to look at a couple of the water birds in the absence of those giant reptiles. Quite a magnificent spur-winged goose with his nice pinkish legs and reddish bill. I spent about 6 months working as an anti-poaching pilot in the Limpopo National Park in Mozambique about a year ago, and one of the big duties in my day to day was a patrol along the lake shore at the Massingira Dam, huge dam, in this wilderness area, absolutely full of water birds, and these spurwings were always quite a frightening thing in my light airplane, because you kind of come around a corner at quite some speed, and a flock of 40 or 50 of these geese take off out of the grass, and you're sort of trying to dodge them. Obviously, hitting something as large and as heavy as that in a light airplane could be disastrous. Yeah, and certainly didn't want to be in a position where I had to land in that water. It has one of the greatest densities of Nile crocodiles per kilometer or so of lakeshore, I would say anywhere in southern Africa. Frightening stuff. But a bit like the flamingos a little earlier, this guy is just getting up to a bit of pruning now. So all birds have a gland at the top of the tail, kind of right at the end of the spine. If you buy a raw chicken, it sort of looks like a pimple just above the tail, and that gland, when stimulated, produces a very specialized oil that the birds will actually kind of condition all of the feathers with. It's a critical element to their system of waterproofing, and it keeps those feathers in good shape, nice and aerodynamic. Sugarbits has asked what animals live in the hill behind the waterhole at Tau. Sugarbits, your guess is probably as good as mine, but that rocky, hilly habitat is wonderful for things like the rock hyraxes that we've been seeing around Stony Point, and then a couple of other very specialized species, things like the clip-springer, a tiny antelope, which for anybody who doesn't know, spends basically all of its life up in the rocks, jumping around, and even things like leopards will find that place a very, very suitable home. You'll also find things like the Chacma baboons in big troops roosting up in the hills, hopefully safely out of the reach. Things like lions. So yeah, those rocky hills can be an awesome place to explore. And not to mention all of the smaller stuff, things like reptiles that live up there. If you're a fan of snakes or lizards, rocky hillsides are a great place to start. And a lone wildebeest bull, by the looks of things, crossing in the back there. No, he's not alone. There's two wildebeest bulls there. I'm just remembering that a number of months ago, that acacia tree, sort of on the left-hand side of the screen there, was completely chock-a-block with nesting weaver birds. And they must have had a successful season in my absence from live at the waterhole, and kind of moved on to greener pastures. I don't see any of them there. What made me think of it is I watched the most staggering documentary last night called A Zoo Quest in Color, which is the colorized version of David Attenborough's, the legendary David Attenborough's kind of earliest adventures in television and the natural world. And the first subject that he covered was somewhere in Africa, a colony of weaver birds nesting in a tree, just like that. And the humble weaver bird, that's where the entire journey began. Yeah, if you haven't seen that, it was absolutely mind-blowing. A yellow-billed duck has now settled just on the water's edge to the right of this spur wing. Another perhaps less frequently seen waterbird species, and appropriately named. Genetically very, very close to the mallard duck that you find in parts of the northern hemisphere indigenously. Unfortunately, those mallards are an alien invasive species in South Africa. I think a lot of them have just escaped from farms and private bird collections and that sort of thing. But the issue is the red-billed duck, the yellow-billed duck, and I think the African black duck are such close cousins of those mallards that they can hybridize. So for African bird life, it's creating some problems, kind of polluting the gene pools. So yeah, long may these kind of pure wild populations of things like the yellow-billed ducks last without the influence of those aliens. Once again, most of these waterbirds are wet season breeders, and they choose to raise families when conditions are very good and when the vegetation around these waterholes is nice and thick, in which they can kind of establish a nest and keep it camouflaged. So I think the breeding for most of these birds is over for the year. But with any luck in the good wet months that we did have, these guys have packed on enough fat to see them through the challenging times that will doubtlessly come over the next couple of months. We are in an El Nino / La Nina cycle at the moment, so I think we're in for a pretty dry season. But thankfully, as is generally true in nature, this too will pass. So provided the animals are strong enough to survive the tough months, the rains will fall once again and things will get easier. Yeah, there's perhaps lots of lessons we can take and bring into our own human lives from the natural world. Things to do with that resilience, patience, perseverance. Sugarbits has asked, are there any earthworms in the soils of South Africa? Sugarbits, there certainly are. Of course, you'd expect to find those in more tropical areas with more moisture in the soil. I don't know how many you would find here in Madikwe, perhaps close to the water though. And certainly earthworms can be an indicator of soil health. I've definitely got loads of them in the soil here in my garden in suburban Nelspruit, quite close to the Kruger National Park, further up in the northeast. Yeah, loads of earthworms. Alrighty, well, in the absence of sort of big, impressive, high-profile species here at Tau, I think we may switch back over to our elephants at Tembe. Well, no elephants to speak of. That may have been a bit presumptuous of me. But we do have a number of impala way in the back. And I'm sure quite a bit of bird life. A couple of warthogs off on the right there. I can see those quite a distance. Yeah, what a lush late summer scene. It's interesting, we get a species of fish that actually specializes in eking out an existence in these standing stagnant puddles that are left after elephants have been active. It has the shortest life cycle of any vertebrate anywhere on Earth, so any creature out there with a spine. And one of those killifish can go from an egg, so an undeveloped egg, to a fully developed breeding adult in as little as 6 to 8 weeks. How staggering is that? And they've kind of slotted into a little evolutionary niche to capitalize on very seasonal water supplies. So quite obviously, many of those puddles may dry up. So those fish are under pressure to hatch, develop quickly, find a mate, lay some eggs, and die in probably as little as 2 months. Those puddles will then dry out, leaving those eggs in a state of suspended animation to some degree until the rain falls again. But quite staggeringly, the eggs may be in that state of suspended animation for as much as 10 years. And a single drop of rainfall landing on that little embryo is enough to trigger the entire cycle again, and it all kicks off once more. I think we've got an African jacana just on the edge of that green floating vegetation, kind of in between those impalas. It's quite a nice bird species. And obviously warthogs and impala all over the show. Now those jacanas are quite unusual amongst birds in that they practice a behavior called polyandry. So obviously a very normal situation would be a male bird with many female mates, as is often the case amongst birds. But in jacanas, it is the polar opposite. It is the female that has many male partners. So a male and a female will meet and they mate, and the female produces 4 eggs. Then she packs her bags, pushes off, and she will never see the family again. It is up to the male to handle the entire duty of incubating the eggs and raising the chicks. That female then heads off, finds another male, and lays another clutch of eggs with him. But it takes a slightly darker turn if a female finds a male that she's interested in, and he's already sitting on a set of eggs, or perhaps he's already kind of brooding over a little clutch of chicks. She sabotages his family. She'll kill the young so that she can have the male to herself. Yeah, some dark stuff. And quite unusually amongst birds, the male has the ability to scoop his brood up under his wings. So 2 chicks under each wing. And he can actually pick them up and he can run, carrying his babies with him. I don't know of any other family of birds that can do that. Catherine says, we have a lot of African ducks and geese here. They've been introduced in the 18th century as pets for kings, or the 19th century. Catherine, I'm presuming you are in Europe somewhere. I certainly have seen Egyptian geese myself in London, and I remember being told a similar story, that they were introduced for private collections for the royals and for hunting purposes. Yeah, it's a bit of an issue, especially with those Egyptian geese, because they are so cheeky and so dominant. They tend to really oppress the smaller, more shy waterfowl species, and they can outcompete them entirely in some cases, which is a bit disappointing. We've got to be very, very careful in our human activities Earth not to introduce species into areas where they don't belong. And that's why many countries are so strict when it comes to traveling to them in terms of what you bring. That's why it's illegal in many places to bring in fresh fruit and raw wood and stuff like that. They're simply worried about the introduction of pests that don't belong. Australia and New Zealand are famous for that. They're very, very, very tight when it comes to import and export, but it's good. You ideally want to keep your natural areas pure. Those alien invasions can be disastrous. Now we're looking at an alien invasion right in front of us here at Tembe. We've chatted about it in a couple of the episodes of this Live at the Waterhole. But here it is that not 2 jacanas heading off there. It's that floating water cabbage, that green stuff on the water there. It's not hyacinth, which is also an invasive species and also found in South Africa, unfortunately. But this is also from South America, I believe, probably brought in accidentally, and now it is just plague proportions. It's quite edible for things like elephants, and I believe hippos will nibble on it as well. But it's very fibrous. It's quite dry. It's not nutritious, so I don't think the animals eat it with too much vigor. And at the rate it expands in the summer months, it can literally cover an entire system of water, a whole lake, a whole river, choking the flow. It blocks all the sunlight out. It stops the circulation of oxygen. It's just really nasty stuff. I believe it can be killed with herbicides, but the problem with spraying herbicides on plants is that they tend to kill basically everything that they touch in terms of plant material, which is not what we would want in a place like this. So I believe the next best bet would be to haul it out manually, but that is a lot easier said than done, especially in a place like this where we could quite arguably find something like a Nile crocodile. You wouldn't want to be wading in there with a sack, that's for sure. Alrighty, well, let's check out another location for the first time this afternoon. Let's pop over to Rosie's in Olifants West Game Reserve. So we are now checking things out here at Rosie's in Olifants West Nature Reserve, which is a wonderful section of the Greater Kruger National Park, very, very close to the town of Hoedspruit in South Africa's Limpopo province. And while it may appear that there's not much going on here, we actually have something kind of hiding in plain sight, and he's just made himself visible. That is quite a large hippopotamus, hippo bull more specifically, I suspect. Just having a bit of a snooze close to the water's edge there. Now, once again, it might seem a bit unusual to see this guy all on his own, but I reckon this is a youngish hippo bull that's probably been ejected from the pod he was born into in the Olifants River, which is basically just over that hill in the background there. And so driven out by a much larger, quite dangerous dominant bull. This guy is seeking refuge in Rosie's today. It's a bit of a tough and lonely couple of years for many of these hippo bulls that do get ousted. But provided he can stay out of trouble, keep himself healthy, find enough food to eat, he will then hopefully, with a bit more size, be given the opportunity to go back, challenge one of those dominant bulls, possibly kill him, and take control of one of those families. And that is ultimately the story of many a successful hippo bull in the wild in Africa. Living by tooth and claw, it's a pretty brutal existence, and you can certainly see that story told in the scars that kind of lash his back there. He is no stranger to fighting. A real survivor. Unfortunately, his presence here in the water at Rosie's is making this water quite stagnant. As hippos sleep, they defecate throughout the day. So he's pooping out sort of all the digested grass from his activities on land last night. it tends to make this water pretty stinky and fairly green. I have seen a couple of fish swirls here, so certainly there are some fish in there cashing in on the nutrients he is delivering. Yeah, you may not believe it, but statistically these guys are responsible for more human fatalities in Africa each year than any other animal. I think possibly the crocodile arguably kills more, but the difference between attacks of the two species is that when a hippo kills a person, they leave a body. Because hippos are vegetarian, they are herbivorous, that when a crocodile catches a human, often there is absolutely nothing left behind, no proof. Alrighty, well, I think we might let sleeping hippos lie, but let's check back in with the bird life around Comfers Dam. So back over at Comfers Dam, an equally sleepy scene with a flock of flamingos, some coots in the background, and an assortment of smaller duck species, possibly red-billed teals there. Just enjoying a nice relaxing day here in Kimberley. I first viewed flamingos probably at about 8 years of age, running along a deserted stretch of beach in northern Mozambique, which was a much safer place to visit at that time. But yeah, they really captivated my imagination, seeing these sort of vivid pink long-legged birds flying through the air, and especially along the coast. It's not really what I would have expected. And yeah, that's something that will stick in my memory, I think, for the rest of my life. They are such bizarre, colorful birds. Yeah, apologies for having to leave Rosie's a little bit prematurely there. Apparently, some maintenance was scheduled for that camera for today, so someone's going to get busy with that. There's also some wonderful coverage on how these flamingos nest in, I think it's the latest Planet Earth series from the BBC. Another magnificent David Attenborough special, which if you haven't, you absolutely must. But it very clearly shows how these flamingos actually nest kind of in these sort of muddy lake beds. They scoop up turrets of mud, probably half a foot tall, and then deposit an egg or two eggs on the top, incubated by both birds for a number of weeks, and then the young hopefully hatch and can begin their lives from there. But as shown in that BBC documentary, and I won't give away too much, the arrival of kind of improperly timed rainfall can be disastrous, flooding out those nesting colonies and just devastating them. Thankfully, a special island was constructed here at Comfers Dam, somewhere out of sight, and a couple of artificial nest turrets were made by local ornithologists with enormous success. It encouraged those flamingos to come in droves, and they have year in and year out successfully raised thousands of chicks here. These flamingos also perform quite a spectacular mating ritual, which I think, if memory serves, was covered in that wonderful Planet Earth 3 documentary that I mentioned. It's almost like a ballet. It's really the most amazing thing. The entire flock, and it could be thousands of birds at a time, practice this like synchronized dancing in the water. Yeah, really pretty surreal looking stuff, and it's a good opportunity for the males, I guess, to present themselves to those females and prove their health and virility, all as a means for a nice mate selection. And should a pairing be successful, that two will kind of break away from that big flock and mate, and then start to construct one of those mud turret nests. They truly are some pretty bizarre birds. And as mentioned in a slightly earlier segment, this activity of standing on one leg is actually how they sleep. So quite bizarrely, and it's something that they share with a number of other waterbird species, they have the ability to rest one half of the brain at a time. So When you do see a bird stood very, very still on one leg, it's reckoned to have sort of put that half of the body and that half of the brain to sleep. And I reckon that is probably some anti-predator behavior. Obviously, maintaining an amount of consciousness is pretty useful should an eagle or a cat or something arrive. But anyway, I think in the interest of keeping things moving, let's have another look at Stony Point on South Africa's Cape Coast, at what's happening there. So live now from Stony Point Nature Reserve in Betty's Bay, along this wonderful Cape Coast. We're just having a bit of a scan around. I do see one rock hyrax just kind of in the bottom left corner of the screen there. Now we checked in with these guys yesterday. Oh no, it is two, at least two. These rock hyrax, after all, live in quite large colonies, should the habitat permit it, should there be ample food available. And this Stony Point area is perfect for them. Oh, there's another one disappearing. I didn't even see him there. So they're often incorrectly referred to as rock rabbits by English-speaking South Africans. I think it's just one of those funny names that's kind of emerged over time. Absolutely no connection to a rabbit whatsoever. Though you'd be forgiven for thinking it. Now, certainly they're sort of rabbit-sized and they're small and furry and they do an amount of hopping in between these rocks. But in actual fact, their closest connections in the wild are in fact the biggest of all pachyderms, the elephant. They have the same number of toes on their feet. There's some people coming down there. No, naturally quite nervous of people, those hyraxes are disappearing. Alrighty, well, we will keep an eye on things here at Stony Point. Hopefully these people make an exit and the hyraxes return. But in the interim, let's head up to another favorite of mine, Old Donyo in southern Kenya. So a very vibrant summer scene from the live camera here at Old Donyo Lodge in spectacular Kenya. Now we had a comment, I think it was yesterday, that these scenes from Old Donyo are like a living painting, and I think that was quite apt. I can't remember who said that. Just the most spectacular look. Kilimanjaro is a bit obscured by the clouds in the background there, but it is there. And just those flat-topped umbrella thorn acacia trees. And should we be fortunate enough to get sightings of species like the slide giraffes and the big tuskers that do live here, yeah, it makes it a pretty wonderful place to visit. Hello, Darkmane Lover. Nice to have you on board with us. So Darkmane Lover has asked, what is the average lifespan on dassies? Dassies are rock hyraxes. And Darkmane Lover, it's reckoned to be about a decade. So possibly a little bit more in captivity, perhaps slightly less in the wild. But no, very, very interesting animals, those little rock hyraxes. I was lucky enough to spend a bit of time on Pridelands with Wild Earth, and actually do a segment on an elephant, and then immediately after we found a pretty rare, at least for that area, rock hyrax. So it was cool to make the comparison, especially with both of them being so closely related. There's a number of butterflies around the water's edge. We're kind of having a bit of a look for bird life, but in the absence of birds, maybe we can check out those butterflies. Yeah, one of the very pleasant factors about visiting these safari destinations in Africa in the summer, at least for me anyway, is the presence of an explosion of color in our many varied butterfly species. I can't speak for East Africa specifically, but South Africa is home to over 800 species of butterflies. And yeah, in recent years, it's something I've got more and more into. Amateur lepidoptery, or the study of butterflies. Yeah, I did catch a glimpse of a couple of green-banded swallowtails, which are very, very large, dark butterfly species. They're fluttering around, but I'm not sure where they went off to. They're kind of drawn in by the water and perhaps a little bit of this moist elephant dung that is around the edge. But there we go. And a little ground squirrel. And Nadine, who's directing us, is commenting on some sort of funny audio in the background there. I unfortunately am not getting it. The way it works with these shows, with us presenting them locally, is that you can either hear the director or the feed, and it's obviously quite important to be listening to the director. So I'm not quite sure what's going on in the background. Nadine said she thought it might be something like a baboon. We certainly have been seeing the local troop of olive baboons around the waterhole here at Oldonyo in recent episodes. So we'll keep an eye out for them. It's always nice to see them. And in the heat of the day, this is the time when they would come down for a drink. But maybe not. We'll see what happens. Yeah, certainly a lot of those swallow-tailed butterflies around have been drawn out of the bush by the availability of water. And they do need access to fairly regular water. Got some bird life as well. That looks like that looks like one of the widers. Now, which one exactly, I'm not 100% sure, but it looks vaguely reminiscent of the pin-tailed wider that we get in South Africa. We have been seeing the straw-tailed widers around the waterhole here at Oldonyo of late, but this guy is pitch black. These are almost certainly the females of the species. And that's a cutthroat finch on the right. Yeah, with a very distinctive reddish throat there. It makes enough sense why he's known as the cutthroat. They're a bird species we don't often see where I have guided in the Lowveld, but if you do see them, they often share the nests of red-headed weavers. Almost as a bit of a timeshare, the red-headed weaver builds the nest and utilizes it, raises its family, and then leaves. And these cutthroat finches move in once the homeowners are gone. And Sugarbits has asked, what was that little white flower to the left of the waterhole clover? Maybe cover. Sugarbits, I reckon that was probably one of the wild hibiscus. You get many species of wild hibiscus in the summer. So many insects around. Occasionally a little blast of orange color as a dragonfly races across the screen. And again, for many people, I think that, there's all those butterflies having their drink on the opposite side. I think for many people, the insects can be quite an off-putting factor during the summer months. And for that reason, many people choose to come on safari during the dry season in the winter. But for me, the bugs are just one of those magical elements of the summer landscape. And so much variety. There are thousands of different insects, all serving vital purposes, pollinating. And there's our straw-tailed wider. So very appropriately named, the straw-tailed wider male, and high up on that perch to the left, and joined by what I believe is his mate, and a female off on the right. Yeah, huge sexual dimorphism, or huge visual difference between the two sexes. The male has evolved those really pretty extravagant tail feathers as a visual indication of his health, his dominance, and his virility. Fitting into the theory of natural selection quite nicely, it is the quality of those feathers that will give the female the indication of the strength and the quality of that male as a mate. Obviously, she only wants the very best DNA optimizing those eggs of hers and going into the next generation of wider chicks. And now, quite interestingly, they are brood parasites, and such is true for all of the widers, to my knowledge. So a brood parasite, similar to a cuckoo, gets another bird species to incubate its eggs. So these widers will keep an eye on other firefinches, waxbills, that sort of thing, weaver birds, small nesting, seed-eating birds. And when they see those birds constructing a nest and beginning to lay eggs, the widers will wait for a gap, wait for the birds to be away, bolt into the nest, The female lays an egg and then she exits. And she has no involvement in the raising of her own young. And they rely on the host family to raise that chick. And birds are such instinctive animals that they can't really even tell the difference between their own eggs and the eggs of another species. So yeah, that instinct kicks in and they do all of the work. Provide food, raise and fledge those chicks. Yeah, it might seem quite sneaky, and it certainly is, but it's a remarkably efficient way of raising a family. Now, they also have the benefit of, I guess, metaphorically and quite literally placing their eggs in different baskets, because should one nest be destroyed, rather than losing their entire family, the widers only lose a single chick. But if they lay multiple eggs in multiple nests, they will almost certainly be successful in raising chicks or getting somebody else to raise chicks every single year. Darkmane Lover says, beautiful birds, and they are. There was a bit of a legend when I was growing up that after a very heavy rainfall, birds like the widers, and in my neck of the woods it was the paradise wider when I was growing up. The birds get so saturated that if you ran after them, you could actually chase them down and catch them. Absolute nonsense, I can tell you. I think it was probably one of those old wives' tales designed to get kids out of the house after heavy rains. Super. Spas, I see your question. Spas has asked how the eggs of a straw-tailed wider actually look. Spas, I don't know, but I've got my bookshelf right next to me. And I've got a pretty wonderful Robert's Birds egg book for this problem specifically. So let me have a look. And now this book that I've got is specifically for Southern Africa, so I don't think it's going to have the straw-tailed wider specifically in it, but with some luck it covers the indigenous widers in Southern Africa. I'm sure they're very likely to be quite similar to the straw-tail. But let me see. This is such a good book. If you do find bird nests and bird eggs interesting, get yourself a copy. Robert's Nests and Eggs of Southern African Birds. Okay, well that answers it then. The eggs are tiny and they're completely snow white, which is quite useful because the eggs of their host species, many of those firefinches, waxbills, that sort of thing, are also white. So ideally, you would want the eggs, if you are a brood parasite, to match those of your host quite closely, so that they go unnoticed. Yeah, now we know. White eggs. Bird eggs obviously are extremely varied in terms of shape, color, pattern, even texture. And historically, I think for many years, it was a popular hobby, at least in kind of Victorian Europe, for people to collect eggs. A bit like some people collect seashells, but obviously egg collecting is quite a destructive hobby, with you having to raid bird nests in order to achieve it. So thankfully, I think in most places, certainly in places like England, it's been outlawed for years and years. So don't raid bird nests. It's a bird out of focus, but I wonder if that's not a superb starling. It's pretty dark. No, probably more likely one of the glossies. These starlings and many individuals in the starling family have this remarkable iridescent effect on their feathers. Seen in strong light, they almost shine a little bit like oil on water, if you've ever seen that. And yeah, it is certainly it's an effect of little filaments in those feathers at very specific angles, and a direct result of the way light is refracted as it hits those feathers. So take a look at those feathers up close under a microscope. They are free from pigment. They're sort of brown in color. But hit them with sunlight and they just take off. So I believe some of our reptilian residents may have made an appearance down at Tau. So in a moment or two, we'll probably be heading over there. Haha, magnificent. So some very red-skinned elephants, stained by the rusty oxidized soils here at Madikwe, and at least two of our crocodile residents in the same frame. So they must have been in the water when we were here only a few minutes ago. But I think this lovely beating sunshine has driven them up onto the bank. And we've come just in time to catch the last few moments of these ellies drinking before they move off as well, by the looks of things. Yeah, it's another kind of interesting characteristic of elephants when you do come on safari. Elephants obviously take on the color of their environment or the soil in their environment because of this activity of splashing mud onto their wrinkly but fairly vulnerable skins. So wherever you travel in Africa, the elephants are different colors. And as far as South Africa is concerned, one of the only places you can see these red-stained elephants is Madikwe. In East Africa, you get them in places like Tsavo. And again, that red color is an indication of iron oxide in soil. Iron, as it breaks down, begins to rust. And oxidization, the process of the formation of rust, gives us these lovely rusty elephant skins. It makes them really stand out against this concrete, this white rock in the open here at Madikwe. And Nadine has asked a very good question. She's do we reckon they prefer a specific type of soil on their skin? I don't think so. I think so long as it's moist and it blocks the sun, keeps them nice and cool, they're not too fussy at all. I've even seen ellies splashing in the mud around a pan like Rosie's where there's a hippo established and the mud is like stinky and quite dirty. So I don't think they're too fussy at all. That is so cool, having these ellies sort of in the same direct frame as the crocs. Elephants are very intelligent and certainly at close range they can see the crocodiles. But I wonder if one of these cheeky youngsters will chase them into the water. Let's see. They are certainly very, very close, within a meter or two of these crocs. No ways. Jeepers, that is close. Nadine is saying she wonders if the crocs are sort of thinking at this moment, should we just sit still? Should we move? My goodness, they found themselves in amongst a fortress of elephant legs, though. Talk about a sticky wicket. My word. Yeah, there we go. It's getting a bit uncomfortable for those crocs, I think. That is a very, very, very cool interaction. And Joan Mello says, always coming through with croc sightings. Definitely, Joan. Nice to give some reptiles their time in the limelight. Again, the reptile family is often highly vilified, a bit like many of us treat hyenas and things like the vultures. They're not seen as nice things, but I think the reptile community can be very diverse, quite beautiful, and yeah, pretty exciting to view, as proved by these crocodiles time and time again here at Tau. But again, those elephants are very careful animals. They don't necessarily want to look for trouble with the crocs, so they navigated these two masking reptiles quite skillfully there. But certainly I think there were a few tense moments for those crocs in amongst all of those legs. Cassandra Neal says, my heart was literally in my mouth then. Certainly, Cassandra. That was quite an exciting little segment. And it's a testament to the nature of these wildlife experiences and certainly this wild earth content. You just never really know what's gonna happen. Raw and unscripted. And again, two fairly significant crocs in terms of size, probably somewhere around 3 to 3.5 meters. I'd say 10, 11 foot. I worked with a guy, one of my earliest bosses, who would chat to guests about crocodiles, and he'd say, yeah, whatever, this crocodile is only 2 meters long. Not a big one, but enough to ruin your day if it was to grab you by the foot. And I think that's probably true. And Nile crocs get very significant under the right conditions. So with exposure to enough heat and with plentiful food, they can live well over a century and certainly get in excess of 5 meters, 15 or 16 feet, and weighing in excess of a metric ton. Still, they're not the biggest crocodilians in the world. The title for the greatest is the saltwater crocodile from certain parts of Asia, but perhaps most well known in parts of the Northern Territory of Australia. They very regularly get to 6 or 7 meters. Oh, big elephant in the water now. It just goes to show how deep this water actually is. Certainly 1.5 meters, 2 meters deep, something like that. Enough to wet the belly of this adult elephant bull. Though, come to look at it, it is actually predominantly mud. Elephants serve a vital purpose, and it's being demonstrated really nicely here at keeping waterways open. So as this powerful animal plows his way through this mud, he carves channels in between these grassy lumps, and that allows a whole host of other species to move through in his wake. So that'll keep these systems open for the movement and the breeding of things like fish. And this waterhole at Tau is almost certainly home to a population of catfish and indigenous tilapia. And even things like water birds and the crocodiles are then free to move in the gaps as well. So talk about gardeners of Eden. Still, from time to time, it can get tricky for these elephants. If the mud is really, really deep, we're talking like 2.5, 3 meters deep, it is still possible for an elephant to become trapped in the mud. And it does happen in the very, very driest parts of our winter season, our dry season. Ellies do occasionally get bogged and require some assistance. LG7 is asking, have elephants been stepped on or ever been stepped on by a croc? LG7, I'm sure they have. But again, in the same breath, elephants are very sentient. They're quite sensitive. They have arguably the greatest sense of smell of any animal on land. So I have no doubt that they have the ability to smell the crocodile. And yeah, they're certainly generally aware of a crocodile's presence, provided that croc is on land. Now, there are a couple of pretty staggering photographs circulating of sightings where crocodiles have grabbed drinking elephants by their trunks. But I've never heard of an instance where a crocodile has actually pulled an elephant into the water. Obviously, the elephant has just got so much more strength. But without a doubt, that trunk is a very sensitive organ, so it must be a painful thing to have. And one exciting note to kind of end the show on. I think we've only got about 5 minutes left, unfortunately. It was looking like our afternoon was going to turn into a slightly sleepy one. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But it all kicked off in the 11th hour, so to speak. Alrighty, I think we've reached the limit of our camera there. It doesn't angle any more to the right. So let's check out those crocs once again if we can. Yeah, it can be pretty tricky for our directors trying to keep up with the action on these cameras, especially considering that the the Wild Earth HQs in Rivonia in Johannesburg. So often these feeds are being driven very remotely, and there can be time delays, there are glitches. It's tricky. It's not always easy. Yellow-billed stork is that big white bird. Grey heron a little bit further off there. But thankfully our crocs are very much stationary in their basking spot. So pretty much all reptiles are ectothermic. There are one or two kind of exceptions to that rule. Bit of cloud coming over there, casting shade. But what ectothermic means is essentially, in layman's terms, to be cold-blooded. So to require an external source of heat energy to regulate one's own internal body temperature. So these Nile crocodiles very routinely will spend a bit of time on the bank doing some basking. A couple of kudu, one of our largest antelope, coming down to the water's edge for a drink as well. Now, a young kudu would certainly be on the menu for one of these crocodiles. So you can see just how nervous they are coming down to the water's edge. And now kudu are very good at living almost independently of water, and in some parts of more arid regions of southern Africa, they do have the ability to live independently of water. But where water is available, they will come down and drink. Casper says, good day, Wild Earth, Liam and everyone. Great safari. Thanks, Casper. Nadine says she reckons these kudu are probably not going to come quite as close as those ellies. I have a feeling she's right. When they do spot those crocs, I think they're going to give them a wide berth. Where elephants have the advantage and some degree of security, given their bulk, their size. Again, these kudu are on a crocodile menu. And while it is unlikely that a crocodile will try and catch an antelope on land, they do find, the kudu do instinctively find these crocodiles quite frightening if they can see them, for good reason. I think with less than 60 seconds remaining of the show, we may unfortunately be leaving you on a bit of a cliffhanger there. I think we may not get to see if these kudu do react. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. That's the way it goes. But otherwise, from our greater team here at Wild Earth, from our directors for the day, Tulu and Nadine, as well as myself, Liam, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat you through a couple of these wildlife scenes. And till we meet again.